Over the last 2 weeks, I have been redesigning this boring building with the help of you guys, through the site analysis process all the way up to designing the elevations and sections for what this building should look like. But you remember how I promised we would be sending this to the local government once we finish all of the design work? Well, that terrifying time has come now. And unfortunately, I don't think you can just walk into a local government's office with good vibes and a couple sheets of paper and hand it over and then being like, cool. At least I don't think I have the huevos or like the confidence to be able to do that. Not to mention, if you just send people a bunch of pretty new drawings, it's not enough to demand from our developers and the people putting money forward for these projects to really make a change in the way that they operate and build out our built environment. We need numbers, we need research, and we need evidence that people would actually enjoy being there. So we have 3 final hurdles to get through in this video before sending off this whole package to the local government and see if it's something that they would approve of. Let's get started on these section drawings, but first I want to see what you guys ended up choosing for the final southwest facade design. Ooh, that's a mouthful. Let's go. What did you end up choosing? I'm going to look at you right now. It's literally on the screen. I have it here. I'm gonna scroll down. Holy moly. Okay, YouTube, you have spoken loud and clear. You want to keep the sunroom, but you have brothers in arms, brothers in voting power. I have a newsletter, where if you download my site analysis workbook, I will send you a 30-page workbook on how to conduct a site analysis, and then you'll get these one-off emails from me asking for you to vote, and there I'm actually spending a little bit more time reading through the comments because, yeah, YouTube comments, sometimes you guys get a little crazy in there. It's like a party that I didn't know I was going to, and then you ultimately end up showing up and it's really late, and then everybody else is kind of has already drank the party juice, but you haven't, and you're just kind of looking at things like, what is going on here? That's how the YouTube comments feel sometimes. So, wow, we got 11 responses. Oh, see, look, you guys are a little bit more split here, but the sunroom did win out. The sunroom did win out. So we have seven written responses. I'll read a couple of those now. If you want your written responses to be considered next time, then you definitely should download that workbook because 1, it's really there to help you out, and 2, I'm really only ever sending you information when it comes to these kinds of participatory videos. More light is never too much. I believe a facade needs some balance, hence why windows are needed there. The rest of the wall can be used for a mural, such as the colorful one done there. I did see someone else comment that we should make that other section of the facade a mural as well. So definitely food for thought. It feels more human, a space made for people to live. A mural feels like an afterthought to cover a blank wall. Sometimes, yes, but I do think that there's a benefit to having public art and showing artists in your area, and it makes building facades feel really adaptable as well. Someone else said, I'd want this balcony as a resident. Simple, sweet, to the point. I think they make a good point. I will say, we will caveat, I do not know what's on the other side of that blank wall. So it looks like our southwest facade section, gosh, that's a mouthful, that will have a balcony on it. Let's get started on. So here's our existing facade and what we are proposing based off of what you guys essentially chose throughout the last 2 episodes of this project. When you're looking at drawings like these, a couple things that we should note are the elevation callouts, which you'll see on the side of each of these buildings. That's not necessarily going to change too much. However, what I want you to also focus on is where this A is. This is calling out a section drawing, of which we just completed. Here's the existing facade as well as facade A. So A, the A that you see here, is calling out from the A that you see here. So when we slice into the facade, like straight on, this is what we would see. Here, you'll notice that we also have a few callouts. A08 is the page number that we should be looking at. So if you can see in the corner, we have A7 and A08. And I've made purposefully a couple of callouts to show where we're going to add stucco and where we'll be adding cornices. This helps give us a better idea of what's going into the building construction, with arrows pointing to what each of these different elements are and giving people a more granular look at how the facade of this building would be put together. Not only do we have that section drawing here, and remember call out A, but we also have call out B and our C call out. Section B is calling out a cut of the new sunrooms and balconies that we have here. And these lines are used to just cut through a section of the building if there's a lot of repetitive design. That means if we have B here, cutting all the way through the whole building, this facade at a scale of 175 would be too long to fit on this one piece of paper. But there's a couple of really important details that we should show on this graph that we can't necessarily show if we were to cut the whole thing. So this design goes from the base floor to floor 2. Then we cut out a lot of these 2 floors here because those are repetitive and redundant to the first 2 floors. And we show the rest of this facade, which is up here. And that's why we have these little breaks. And the same goes for section C. And I just want to remind everyone what we're working towards. So here are the renders that we are proposing for the facade of this building to look like. But I do have a problem with renders. They do a great job of showing what the building would look like on site, but they don't necessarily prove whether or not the space below it would be used more. So I decided to go back to the site as well as 2 other locations in the city to answer one question. All right, so I'm gonna plant myself in this one spot for 15 minutes and observe side by side when and how many people are moving through this space. I tried my best to find a lot of similarities in these places in that they all have bike racks nearby, they all have a bike lane in the shot, and they have sidewalks as well as a commercial area that people would be able to walk through. Because when we're mixing urbanism and social sciences, how people move, it's really difficult to find some sort of a control group to work with. Which one thing I noted while comparing all of these places is that when you have a bus stop nearby, there's more pedestrian volume just in general, which can increase the amount of people going into businesses. And the reason I keep bringing up the financial side of things is because that is what the developers and local government are interested in to make sure that the local economy and local quality of life is as high as it is. These are just things that we need to understand in order to communicate our wants and desires for lovely, charming places to the people who have the money, who are making the decisions to build them or not build them. Another thing to note, the places that have the most amount of foot traffic also have benches, which sends this subliminal message of, hey, you're allowed to be here and you're also just allowed to be here for a long time. And truly, like, it is so surprising to me to see Les Cairo at like 10:30 in the morning, 10:45 I think it was, in a sunny moment, a rare sunny moment. And there were 29 people over the span of the whole 15 minutes. Now, one can argue that there are parts of the city that do need to be quieter, that there are people who do not want to be living in areas that have as much noise or as much jaleo as the old town of Pamplona or other really dense parts of the city. To which I say, I understand that. And I think places like Iturrama have shown us a great example of how we can still offer amenities and still have healthy pedestrian flow while still catering to this quieter kind of life. But I would also argue that if you are building apartment buildings to allow for that same level of density as in the old town, if not more, because of the height of these buildings, you have to know what comes with the territory, and therefore you should build ground floors that are engaging and attractive for people to be in. Now, is a high pedestrian footfall volume directly correlated to the style of the building? Well, honestly, that's hard to tell with 100% accuracy in these studies. We also have to factor in things like public transit, the amount of commercial areas that are in the space, as well as what those commercial areas are. But honestly, in my opinion, if a place is designed with care and not just rapidly thrown up without thought to what the aesthetics of the place are going to be, regardless of if that is brutalist or new traditional, people are more likely to want to hang out in those places. So to prove that people would not only like the renders that you would see on this page in real life, but also probably use the space a little bit more, especially if we added this bench here. I did add a screenshot of the data from the study at all 3 of these different locations to show how many people are walking by within that 15-minute period, and then used a couple of additional studies that I referenced at the end of this document to show how adding things like bus stops, adding things like benches, and making facades beautiful, or just showing that people care, can increase the volume of pedestrians using a given area in a city. But like anything in life, I know that there is one question looming in all of your noggins, and that is, every project is going to come with its price, and this is where your developers and the local government are going to be focusing the most, right? But we want them to also focus on the studies about pedestrian volume, because to break down prices the way that most construction people do it, and this is quite simplified, but again, to show as an example, we have material and the execution costs, so things like construction, any kind of auxiliary materials that are needed, like scaffolding, and the materials, of course, for each of these different facades. So at 100 euros per square meter for the first 2 facades and roughly 500 euros per square meter of the southwest facade, we get a total of 80,120 euros for the materials, which is typically 40% of the total cost for the construction, with the construction work done by manual labor costing around 40 to 50% of the total price, and the additional needs like trash can services and scaffolding costing between 10 and 20% of the total cost for materials and execution. Then of course we have to factor in other additional costs and industry standards, the costs for like technical architects and architects to do the work as well, and different licenses that you would probably need to get the work done. On top of that, we always put a 15 to 20% increase on whatever the total cost of the materials are, because you just always run into things that you did not know exist. And then here in Spain, there are 2 different taxes that you would have to do, 10% for residential construction and then the 21% VAT tax. Once we get that total, I think it is also important for people to understand what their cost would be, what incurred costs would the people living in this building have to pay if this building were to get done. We have to first see how many apartments there are inside of this building and how much the government in Navarra would subsidize this kind of reconstruction or renovation, which gives us a total of 221,000 euros. So when we take the total that we have for the whole project, subtract that by the government subsidy, this is the remaining cost for the building facade renovation and the total cost that each of the individual apartments would have to pay to make this thing a reality. The ugly truth. Is this expensive? Yes. Especially considering how new these buildings are, a proposal to renovate one of these facades that's not even 5 years old is probably not going to get accepted. But the question I think we no longer ask ourselves is that cost worth it long term? Which is going to be the thing that leads to the most long-term success for these places. The building that costs the least amount up front, but has the same design as the building next to it, and then the neighborhood next to it, and then the province next to that? Or is an upfront cost that's a little bit more expensive, but has designers and developers and even local governments that back a design that is cared about, one that was labored over? But honestly, I don't know what the results of this little experiment that we've been conducting over the last 3 weeks will bring. But what I do know is that regardless of your profession or your background, there were over 400 people that had the competence to participate in a design process that's normally cut off to them. And I think that's the problem. Like, it's not that we don't have architects who care, or municipalities who care, or even you and I who care. Maybe it's just that we've never had an effective way to collectively share our voice and our opinion together. So regardless of whatever happens next, thanks for trying this out with me.